Hello?
Blog Talk Radio.
The cycle of tyranny. From bondage to spiritual faith. From spiritual faith to great courage. From courage to liberty. From liberty to abundance. From abundance to complacency. From complacency to apathy. From apathy to dependence. From dependence back into bondage. Good evening, folks. Welcome to another episode of Lori's Talk News Radio, September 25th, 2012. This evening we've got a special guest here, Larry Grathwohl. He's got quite an interesting story, actually. He was a Vietnam vet in the 60s with the 101st Airborne, reconnaissance apparently. And that part of the story could very well end up on some other shows. I think we've made some arrangements there. But I had gotten a hold of Larry specifically because after he got back from Vietnam, he had gotten involved with the FBI and infiltrated the Weather Underground. And Larry, welcome to the show this evening.
Glad to be here, Lori.
Well, thank you for being here.
No problem.
This evening, I
said it's no problem. I'm glad to be here.
Good. Well, Larry, this evening, what I'd really like for you to get into on this show is how did you get involved with the FBI when you got back, and how did you get involved with this assignment, I guess it was, with the Weather Underground, and what did you find out about them when you got in, as far as their plans, specifically some things you'd mentioned on some shows before, and I don't want to take the thunder out here, but I'd like for you to cover specifically some of these camps and the elimination and the police story and all that, and Bill Ayers, and the ties with the president and Bernadine Dorn and all that, and how she was disbarred and the president. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and just mute myself out and let you have the show and tell your story.
Well, let me tell you that I don't think I can cover all of that in a half an hour, and that's how much time we've got, right? But, I'll be glad to come back on and finish whatever we don't get to tonight. Basically, my story with the FBI and with the Weathermen begins shortly after I got out of the Army in 1968. I was a student at the University of Cincinnati, and in the summer of 1969, the Weathermen had people here in Cincinnati that were recruiting students to participate in what they called the National Action, which was going to be held in Chicago in October of 1969. My first inclination was to dismiss these people. I mean, think about it. You're sitting outside talking to some friends about baseball, and you get two scraggly-looking people walk up, and they want to know if you're going to go to Chicago to get the pigs. My immediate response was, you don't have to go to Chicago to get cops. There's cops all over the place. You can stay right here in Cincinnati. But they gave me some literature, and I read it, and the literature was rather formidable, and obviously was very much communistic and very anti-United States, essentially advocating the overthrow of the government. So I went to the Cincinnati Police Department, and they said, well, why don't you go to the meeting? I had been invited to a meeting, and let us know what happens. So I started going to meetings and reporting back to the police as to what was happening. It was very interesting. All of the emphasis during these meetings was on the attack on the city of Chicago scheduled for October, and it went to the extent that sometimes we would meet in one of the parks, local parks, and we would do physical calisthenics, such as what I did in the Army. We would practice karate and how to fight back, And then, of course, strategic meetings where people were broken down into groups and assigned a leader. And, as this is going on for several weeks, I'm becoming more and more convinced that these people should be taken seriously. They have a plan, and they're putting this together, with the idea of physically attacking the city of Chicago. Well, I didn't go to Chicago. I, didn't want to go up there and be encountered by the police department. So when the collective here in Cincinnati departed, I stayed here. I told them I had to work, that my job wouldn't let me off. And after the national action, when they returned to Cincinnati, they got in touch with me and started, recruiting me again. So at this point, I went to the FBI. My thoughts were that the Cincinnati Police Department could only handle stuff here in Cincinnati, and this was a national organization. Obviously, they had collectives in California and the state of Washington, in New York, in Washington, D.C. I mean, it was pretty widespread. It was essentially a faction of the SDS, the Students for a Democratic Society, that had broke off in late 1968. So now I'm reporting to the FBI. At first, the FBI was rather skeptical. I remember walking into an office to meet an FBI agent and getting quizzed as to what my motivations were and what I wanted. And I think that they were just surprised that someone would, walk in off the streets with all this information and not be part of the group, part of the Weathermen. But I finally convinced them that, along with they had my military records, so they knew that, I had been a drill instructor and had been to Vietnam and everything. So after a while, I got their confidence, and the FBI's confidence, and then also the Weathermen's confidence. They asked me to move into the collective, and I became an active member. As a matter of fact, when it was time to go back to school, I dropped out because this was taking up all of my time. Ultimately, the group decided at the national council meeting in Flint, Michigan, that they were going to go underground and begin what they called strategic sabotage. Later on, we would purge about half of the people out of the group. That is, kick them out, because we didn't think they were strong enough to go underground and commit strategic sabotage. We closed all of the collectives. We concentrated people in Chicago, Detroit, Buffalo, New York City, and San Francisco. We were broken down into cells, and basically we were to operate with the objective of blowing things up, committing strategic sabotage. Now, we were doing this as part of what was considered to be a worldwide communist conspiracy to destroy the U.S. And they had people that went to Cuba, had met with the Cubans, had met with the North Vietnamese. There had actually been people, part of the Weathermen, that went to North Vietnam. They had contacts with the Quebec Liberation Front in Cuba, and they actually created an organization called the Venceremos Brigade, which supposedly was to go to Cuba to help harvest sugarcane, but actually it was to disguise the sending of certain people from the Weathermen down there for training by the DGI. The DGI is the Cuban counterpart to the KGB, and actually the DGI was controlled by the KGB at that time. So anyway, in December of 1969, the group went underground and began its strategic sabotage. I was assigned to Detroit, Michigan. Bill Ayers gave us a target, two targets, the DPOA building, that's the Detroit Police Officers Association building, in the 13th Precinct. He wanted the bombs to go off simultaneously. He wanted them to be placed in those locations at the times that there would be the greatest number of people there, and we were to use fence staples and roofing nails as shrapnel, in the bombs. And I was reporting all of this to the FBI as these plans were being developed. Ultimately, the weathermen had decided that me and one of the women in the collective would mix in with a group of people leaving a movie theater near the Detroit Police Officers Association building and place the bomb in an alleyway that was alongside the building and, walk to the back and get in a car and drive away. Well, for some reason, they decided that there was too many of us in Detroit, and we had like 3 collective houses, and that we must have had 20 or 30 people moving in and out, and obviously you can't do that and be a clandestine organization. So they sent me to Madison, Wisconsin, along with 3 other people. I went to the FBI for my final debriefing in Detroit and explained to them that, in my opinion, the bombs were going to be placed because Bill Ayers had debriefed me about everything we had planned, how we were going to, leave the bomb at the DPOA building in the alleyway. At the 13th Precinct, we had figured out a way to put a bomb on a window ledge, and I figured that the bomb would at least go off sometime within the week from which we had originally planned it. I thought because most of us were being sent to different places that, they'd have to rework some of the planning and it would take them at least a week. And it was actually 3 days later from when we originally planned to place the bombs that the surveillance that the Bureau had set up noticed that a paper bag in the alleyway alongside the DPOA building wasn't flowing down the alleyway like the rest of the trash, and they found 13 sticks of dynamite, and it had failed to detonate. So then they went to the 13th Precinct, and they found 34 sticks of dynamite, and it also had failed to detonate. Now, I can tell you that 34 sticks of dynamite would have probably leveled a city block. And after that, the Bureau never doubted my credibility again. Now, one of the interesting asides to Detroit was that I actually wound up in an argument with the FBI and threatened to quit. They didn't want me to leave Detroit because of this bombing plan. And this one supervisor who had to come and meet me on a Sunday afternoon, so he was upset about that. He said, "Well, what if we don't give you permission to go to Madison, Wisconsin?" And I said, "You don't understand. The Weathermen are a paramilitary organization. I've been given orders to report to Madison, Wisconsin tomorrow, Monday. And if I don't show up, I'm out of the group." And this supervisor handed me a pad of paper and a pencil or a pen, and he said, "Well, I want you to write down the names of all of the weathermen you know." And I started to write down some names, and all of a sudden it was like bullshit. And I said, threw the pad back at him, and I said, "Listen, you have all those names in the reports that I've given you. You go look at the files and you find the names." And I called my control agent in Cincinnati and told him that if anything like that happened again, that I was quitting, that I wasn't going to take this BS from these people that obviously didn't know what was going on. Anyway, from Madison, Wisconsin, we didn't accomplish anything. I went to Buffalo, New York. We had planned a couple of bombings in Buffalo, New York, but they decided to send us into New York City. And this is just around the time that the townhouse blew up. Before the townhouse blew up, there had been a bombing at the Park Police Station in San Francisco where the bomb was placed on a window ledge, and for shrapnel they used fencing nails and roofing nails. And when the bomb went off, it killed an officer by the name of Brian McDonald. It injured several others. And while we were in Buffalo, Bill Ayers and I and the rest of the people assigned to Buffalo were having a meeting, and he was criticizing us because we hadn't committed any bombings. And he said, you know, it's really a bad situation when the leader of our group, Bernadine Dorn, has to make the plan, build the bomb, and place the bomb at the Park Police Station. That shouldn't be the leader doing that. It should be one of us. Okay? I reported that to the FBI. Bernadine Dorn placed the bomb at the Park Police Station. I didn't know that a police officer had been killed at that time. Anyway, shortly thereafter, the townhouse blew up. 3 weathermen, Diane Otten, Ted Gold, and Terry Robbins, died. Matter of fact, the entire townhouse collapsed. They were building bombs, ironically, with fence staples and roofing nails that they were going to place at Fort Dix, New Jersey, at an enlisted men's club. And actually there was going to be 3 or 4 bombs and 3 or 4 explosions set to detonate at different times, so when the responders got there, the firemen and the police, other bombs would go off and injure them and kill them too. Shortly after that, after I got to New York, I was scheduled to meet with one of the leadership people. Her name was Linda Evans. And the FBI had told me that J. Edgar Hoover wanted Linda Evans arrested. She had been indicted for conspiracy in Chicago. And I tried to talk him out of it. I said, if you arrest her, my cover's blown, because I'm the newest person in the group. I said, if you leave me alone in a couple of more weeks, I'll be in a position to get even more of these guys. Well, the FBI insisted, and I almost lied to him. I was on the verge of telling him that the meeting had been canceled, but I thought it was too big a risk for as far as my credibility with the Bureau was concerned, so I better go ahead with it. I said, you've got to arrest me too, though. You can't just leave me standing there. That will even be worse. So we came up with a plan where I would run into an FBI agent and they would arrest me for assaulting a federal officer. Now, in Mark Rudd's book, he acknowledges that he was there that day. He saw the arrest happen. Linda Evans and I were supposed to meet with Mark Rudd that morning, but I didn't know it. And if she had come into the restaurant, and when we left we had went to the other restaurant where Mark Rudd was at, we might have been able to arrest him too. As it was, Mark ducked out of the restaurant and got on a bus, and in his book he said he was looking out the window as the agents were putting the handcuffs on me, thinking, gee, he just barely got away. And from that point on, I was never able to reestablish my cover with the group. I knew that was probably what was going to happen. They even went so far at one point, the U.S. attorney indicted me along with 13 other weathermen, hoping that would reestablish my credibility with them. But I knew it wasn't going to work. I was the newest person, and all of these weathermen had essentially went to school together and had been part of SDS, since 1968. So from that point on, I worked special surveillances for the FBI out in California, and did other infiltrations of groups of what we suspected to be radicals or people who were associated with the weathermen. I know also in Detroit, in Buffalo, New York, Bill Ayers it was Cleveland, Ohio. Bill Ayers was at this meeting, but so was Kathy Wilkerson and Terry Robbins and Mark Rudd, quite a few other people, about 20 people. And during this meeting, I brought up the subject of what are we going to do when we take over the government. And what you have to understand is that the Weathermen believed that they were ultimately going to overthrow the United States government. As crazy as that might sound, they believed it back then. And I wanted to know, well, what are we going to do? Because, now we're going to have to govern this country. And nobody really knew what to do as far as governing was concerned, but they knew that they had to protect themselves against what they called the counter-revolution. So they figured that they'd have to build some re-education centers out in the Southwest, and that approximately 100 million Americans would have to be sent to these education centers, and they estimated that approximately 25% of them would not be able to be re-educated and therefore would have to be eliminated. And by that I mean killed. Specifically, in some cases such as mine, when they got a hold of me, I'd be summarily shot, as would people like Richard Nixon and, others that, they wouldn't even waste their time on. The rest of the people would essentially be starved to death and worked to death. And that was really the only thing that they had to say about what to do, after the revolution. Another interesting story at the Flint, Michigan meeting. They called it the War Council, and it was at that meeting that the decision to go underground was made. Bernadine Dorn gave a speech, and now I want you to remember that Bernadine and Bill and all these weathermen, ex-weathermen, they say they were only an anti-war group, that they never meant to hurt anybody or kill anyone. Bernadine gave a speech, and she was praising Charles Manson, okay, and the Manson family and the Manson murders. And she said, she was talking about Sharon Tate, and she said, dig it. Not only did they kill those pigs, meaning Sharon and her friends, but they shoved a fork in Sharon Tate's stomach, and then they sat down and ate their dinner. Now, Sharon Tate at the time was 8 months pregnant. So you can imagine, I was just totally shocked that this young woman would be on stage making a comment like that, about a woman who was 8 months pregnant. Now, it turns out that they didn't shove a fork in Sharon Tate's stomach. It was La Bianca, but the weathermen at that time didn't know that it wasn't Sharon.
Okay, Larry, if we could, this might be a good place to start to wind down, because I'd like to get a couple of things cleared up here.
Okay.
First of all, I want listeners both in the queue right now and those that may listen in the archives later to understand Larry is speaking in first person here. This is not something that he heard. This is something this man lived. These whole things with these concentration camps or detention centers, that people talk about today were being discussed back then. And they have since allocated funds and built these things. Halliburton, it's a whole other story.
Yes.
But nonetheless, Larry, I'd like to thank you for this. I would love to have you back next week to pick this up. And if I'm understanding correctly, from this show, you were going to jump to a fellow broadcasters of mine on Blog Talk?
Yes. What? I don't remember his name, but he's in Birmingham, and I'm sure you do.
Yeah. Yes, I want to give that information. If people want to get a pen or a pencil or something, a crayon, I don't care. I've only got a half an hour show here that goes into 45 minutes. The name of his show, he's also on Blog Talk Radio, is Media Fighter. That's the name of his show. His phone number to call into there, where Larry will be transferring to at the end of this one is area code 646-478-3295. Again, that number is 646-478-3295. Now, in the few minutes we have left, I want to explain that when I first got with Larry, I had talked to him specifically about this Weather Underground story, and he's got some things that he also, I think, wanted to talk about with respect to some things that went on in Vietnam, and he'll determine what he talks about, what he doesn't. So I thought that rather than trying to squeeze all that plus this Weather Underground into this short little show spanning weeks, that maybe we could pick that side of the story up on some of my fellow broadcasters, which is what this one here is. So, Larry, with that, so you'll be fine to come back here next week and continue this story?
Sure.
Okay,
no problem.
Let me, if it's okay, I've got about 4 minutes of the half hour left, and we can go further. I would like to open up to some questions and answers, if that'd be okay.
That's okay.
I'm just going to go ahead and open people's mics here.
Okay.
There's 1559. You're on the air. Do you have any questions for our guest, Larry Grathwohl?
Hi, Lori and Larry. Yes, I do, as a matter of fact. I'm new to all this information, and I don't know who or what the weathermen are. And I wondered if you might discuss that for a moment.
Well, the weathermen were a group of domestic terrorists that were, very active back in the 70s and the early 80s. They basically got off scot-free. The only one I know of that's in jail right now is David Gilbert, and that's for robbing a Brinks truck and killing 2 state troopers in a Brinks guard. But they committed, I don't know how many bombings, I'm going to say 100-plus bombings. And today, Bill Ayers and Bernadine Dorn are very good friends with Obama. As a matter of fact, Obama's first fundraiser when he was running for Illinois senator was at Bill and Bernadine's home. Does that answer? I mean, I could go into more detail, but it would, I think the only thing really I can say is that they're a bunch of unrepentant terrorists. Bill Ayers has said in newspaper reports that his only regret is that they didn't do enough, meaning bombings.
Well, Larry, maybe we can go ahead and save some of that for next week and get into that aspect of the story. Did you have any other calls on this or questions on this particular issues that's been covered today?
No.
Okay, I will tell you this. I've got a book that was written back in 1976. It's titled Bringing Down America, and it's scheduled to be released as an e-book on October the 5th. And it would, if you read that book, it would answer all your questions about who the weathermen were and what they were trying to do. And believe me, they weren't nice people.
Okay, well, thank you, caller, for that.
Excuse me?
Are they still active today?
Well, they're still active, but not as weathermen. Bill Ayers, as an example, was a professor at the University of Illinois. Bernadine Dorn was a professor at the Northwestern University, but they are still basically pro-communist and advocate the overthrow of the government. Bill Ayers, as I said, his only regret is that they didn't do enough. And there's a picture of him standing on the American flag with the caption that says, "Guilty as hell, free as a bird, isn't America wonderful?" And they're still good friends with Obama. Jeff Jones, who's one of the founding members of the Weather Underground, was one of Barack Obama's advisors on the stimulus plan, and also on the health care plan.
Okay, again, let's save that part for next week.
Okay.
And caller, I think that was all the questions you had for now. We can pick this up next week, and I can go to another caller real quick.
Yes, thank you, Lori and Larry.
Thank you.
Okay.
Welcome.
You're welcome.
Hello?
Okay, 646, you're on the air. Any questions there for our guest?
I think that would be me, right?
I
I'm
suppose
just trying,
so.
I'm checking out if I'm in. Okay, all right.
Yes, that's you, Aaron.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just concerned. What are these people saying now? What's their ideology like at this current time? Are they still? Obviously, you said they were unrepentant. Are they developing these Marxist ideologies even further? I mean, have you got a chance to kind of like track some of their thoughts on these issues? And
I've read
all
of their books, and I can tell you that there's not one of them that thinks that they did anything wrong when they were blowing up buildings and killing people. As far as their current positions are concerned, as an example, Bernardine Dorn and Bill Ayers are in support of Code Pink. That's the group that sponsored the trawlers from Turkey to try to penetrate the Gaza Strip about 2 years ago. Isn't it interesting now that we have the Muslim Brotherhood that's taken over Egypt? Bill Ayers and this I can't think of his name. It's Kathy Bodine and David Gilbert's son. They raised him after Bodine and Gilbert were sent to prison. Chesa. He's an advisor to Chavez down in Venezuela. And what these people, they still advocate the overthrow of this government, or if not the overthrow, the gradual changing of it over to a communist or a socialist government. And I think in many ways Obama has us headed right in that direction.
Yeah. There's actually, I guess we can save this for the segment we do. There's a lot of threads I wanted to tie together because a lot of the information you're bringing up, I'm not familiar with it, but I'm familiar with periphery areas of like the Fabian socialists and their whole integral approach to revolution and this type of thing. But yeah, that's kind of what I was wondering.
Okay.
But yeah, I've got some other questions. Lori, you can take it away. He answered my.
Okay. Yeah, I think we're just about. No, we still got a few minutes if you want to take a couple more questions. I'm going to have to hang up in a few minutes so that your friend from Birmingham can call me.
All right.
Okay, Larry. Well, that's about really for this part of what I wanted to get into with this show. Is actually a good place to start to wrap up here. So as we can see, folks, we'll be picking this up next week, but this is actually tying into some of the things that are going on to this very day. So if this has been of any value, please tune in next week, and I'll throw out that number again for Media Fighter on Blog Talk Radio. It's 646-478-3295. We'll see some of you there, and thanks again, Larry, and we will see you back here then a week.
Let me get one more thing out here real quick. I have a blog spot.
Sure.
It's Larry101st.blogspot.com. That's Larry101st.blogspot.com.
Okay, good. I'm sorry I hadn't even thought about having you plug any sites or blog spots. So
yeah, well,
okay,
I didn't think about it either.
Yeah, well, I should have. My bad. Well, again, thank you, Larry, for coming. We will get with you on scheduling next week's show.
Okay.
And I guess we'll go ahead and end this, and then we'll switch over to Aaron and pick up from there. So
thank
you
you so
much.
much, and I'll talk to you next Tuesday.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Good night.